It was the kind of night that doesn't announce itself, the kind that arrives quietly, slipping through the edges of the blinds like it has every other night before, yet something in the air feels final. The room is dim, the only light a faint glow from the screen in your hand, a message waiting, the cursor blinking like a silent dare. The clock ticks in the corner, steady and indifferent. Outside, the world hums with its usual background noise, but in here, the air is still, heavy with something you can't quite name yet. You inhale slowly, the way you do when you're about to dive underwater, and as you exhale, you place the phone face down on the table, not with anger, not with hesitation, but with the kind of certainty that doesn't need witnesses. You don't type. You don't explain. And in that small act, in that subtle refusal, something inside you shifts. For so long, you've lived in explanations, long paragraphs sent to people who stopped reading after the first line, conversations where your voice carried all the weight and there's only added noise, moments where your worth was balanced on whether or not someone else decided to understand it. You've given the benefit of the doubt until it became a debt you couldn't collect. You've poured out patience as if it were infinite, only to watch it evaporate in the heat of their indifference. You've loved without keeping score, yet somehow you're the one left feeling overdrawn. And tonight, you realize the truth you'd been circling for months, maybe years. Silence is not coldness. It is mastery. The phone stays on the table. Your breathing slows, not because you're trying to calm down, but because you are calm in a way that feels foreign and familiar all at once. This isn't the stillness of someone waiting to be chased. This is the stillness of someone who has stopped running entirely. Outside, a car passes, headlights gliding across the wall, a brief, pale wash of light before the darkness settles again. Somewhere in another room, the refrigerator hums. It's strange how loud the world becomes when you stop filling it with your own noise. You've been told your silence will make you look guilty, bitter, maybe even weak. But that's because they've only ever measured strength by volume. What if they're wrong? What if your silence isn't a retreat, but your first real victory? It's a dangerous question, not because it invites fear, but because it invites power. You start to see that the years you spent explaining were not about clarity, they were about control. Theirs over you. Every explanation you offered was an attempt to buy peace from someone who was never going to sell it. Every time you justified yourself, you were trading away the very thing you were trying to protect, your own sense of self. And now tonight, you've decided the transaction is closed. Your mind flickers through memories, times you stayed in the room when you should have walked out, times you reread your own messages trying to find the sentence that would unlock their empathy, times you replayed conversations in the shower like a soldier replaying battles. The irony? You were fighting for someone who wasn't even in the war, but that's over now. You've chosen a different battlefield, the one inside, where the enemy is no longer their opinion, but your own doubt. And already, in the quiet, you can feel the tide changing. The need to respond, fading. The need to be understood, shrinking. The need to have the last word, gone. Silence isn't the absence of a voice. It's the presence of self-respect. In the distance, another text lights up the phone. Brief, familiar, and pulling at the last thread of the old pattern. But you don't move. You're not ignoring them out of spite. You're honoring yourself out of discipline. And discipline, the Stoics taught, is the highest form of freedom. You lean back, close your eyes, and for the first time in a long time, you are not bracing for impact. You are the impact. Not in the way they expect, not with confrontation, not with proof, not with a storm, but with the kind of quiet that reshapes the air around it. The kind of quiet that says, without saying, I no longer need to be understood here, and maybe they'll notice. Maybe they won't. That's no longer your concern. Because tonight is not about them finally listening. Tonight is about you finally stopping. This is the beginning. If you need a calm, disciplined voice in the noise, subscribe to True Stoic Way now, so you never forget the strength you already own. It's strange how long it can take to recognize the weight you've been carrying when that weight is disguised as kindness. You tell yourself it's love, it's patience, it's what good people do. You convince yourself that unconditional giving is the highest virtue, and maybe, in its purest form, it is. But purity is wasted on those who can't tell the difference between a gift and a gift and a resource to exploit. The danger isn't in kindness itself. It's in assuming that kindness will be met with reciprocity simply because your intentions are clean. You believe that generosity will naturally inspire gratitude, that care will automatically be met with care. And when it isn't, when it's met with entitlement, dismissal, or casual neglect, you feel the first cracks forming inside, not because your love is wrong, but because it's being poured into hands that never intended to hold it. Some people are not ungrateful because they don't understand what they've been given. They're ungrateful because they've learned to survive by taking. It's a muscle they've trained to spot a giver, measure their limits, and stretch those limits until the giver no longer recognizes the shape of their own boundaries. They don't need to be cruel to cause damage. All they need is to be consistent in their consuming and quiet in their giving. You start to see the pattern in hindsight, the favors that became obligations, the empathy that became expectation. The way they learned your yes was a reflex and treated it like a guarantee. You start realizing that what you thought was generosity was, in their eyes, just your baseline, something they didn't have to earn, something they could always count on regardless of how they showed up. And here's the miscalculation. You thought kindness was an investment. They treated it like income. The Stoics taught that value doesn't lie in the act of giving alone, but in who receives it. A well-aimed gift nourishes both the giver and the receiver. But when you give to someone whose heart is closed, the gift becomes a transaction with no return, not even in spirit. You're left not just poorer in energy, but diminished in self-respect, because you begin to wonder why you keep offering yourself to someone who keeps proving they were never ready to receive you. When your peace depends on their appreciation, you've already placed your peace in their hands. And if they are careless or worse, calculated, they will drop it without a second thought, then look at you as if you were wrong to expect them to hold it at all. So you keep giving, because maybe they're going through something. Maybe they'll come around. Maybe this next time they'll see. But maybe is a dangerous currency to trade in. It buys you nothing but more of the same. And every time you offer without discernment, you're not just showing them your heart. You're showing them the map to exploit it. Kindness without boundaries isn't kindness. It's self-abandonment in disguise. And while the world praises the selfless, it rarely warns of the cost. The slow erosion of your own voice, the subtle fading of your own needs, the way you start to believe that asking for balance makes you demanding. You're not demanding for wanting the same care you give. You're not high maintenance for expecting presence in return for your presence. The truth is, some people are allergic to equality. They thrive in the imbalance because it keeps them in control. If you're always the one giving, you can't walk away without feeling guilty. That's the trap. But here's the first realization worth holding on to. The problem isn't that you gave too much. It's that you gave to someone who never intended to give back. And the moment you see that clearly, your kindness transforms from a weapon they use into a shield you keep. You begin to aim it differently, not at those who drain, but at those who can meet it, hold it, and honor it. This isn't about becoming cold. It's about becoming accurate. It's about measuring not just your willingness to give, but the worthiness of the receiver. That's not arrogance. That's wisdom. And the people who deserve your generosity will never make you feel like it's a burden. There's no virtue in pouring yourself out to prove you're good. The virtue is in protecting what's good in you so it can last. The day you stop giving blindly is the day you stop confusing depletion for devotion. We begin with the first realization. If this lands for you, let your future self remember. Subscribe to True Stoic Way and type "I choose peace" when you're ready. It always starts small, a missed call they never explain, a promise that evaporates without warning, a moment where they disappear when you need them, only to reappear when they need you. You feel the shift, the slight imbalance, the subtle way. Their attention moves in and out like a tide you can't quite predict, and yet you convince yourself it's nothing. You tell yourself that people get busy, that moods fluctuate, that maybe you're overthinking, but deep down, in that quiet part of you that never lies, you already know. This isn't random. This is a pattern. They know when to pull back just enough to make you reach, and when to offer crumbs to keep you reaching. They don't outright abandon you. They breadcrumb, leaving small tokens of attention scattered along the path, just enough to make you believe there's something worth following. And when they sense you pulling away, they hoover, not to rebuild, but to re-establish control. It's not always loud manipulation. More often, it's calculated silence. The kind that makes you wonder what you did wrong. The kind that keeps you circling back to prove you're still worth their time. They'll go quiet long enough to make you uneasy, then return with a flash of charm or a sudden confession to pull you close again. And you, believing in the story you've been telling yourself, mistake this cycle for connection. You think, if I can just understand them, I can fix this. You think, if I love them the right way, they'll stop hurting me. You think, this isn't who they really are. And maybe, for brief moments, it isn't. Maybe there are glimpses of something real, a look, a gesture, a shared laugh that feels pure. But those moments aren't the whole truth. They're the bait. And the cycle continues. You aren't naive. You see the shifts. You notice how apologies rarely lead to change. You feel how their words and actions live in separate rooms. But hope is a stubborn tenant in the heart. You stay, not because you don't see the pattern, but because you want to believe you can outlast it. That's the cruelest part, how hope keeps you tethered to harm. It whispers that leaving means you didn't try hard enough, that walking away makes you a quitter, that love means enduring the worst until the best finally arrives. But love, real love, doesn't demand that you suffer to prove its worth. The Stoics would call this a misalignment between perception and reality. You see the person they could be, and you treat that vision as if it's already true. But a vision without action is just a fantasy, and you cannot build a life on someone else's potential. So the questions begin to change. Not why did they lie, but why did I keep trusting words without proof? Not why did they disappear, but why did I keep chasing someone who runs from me? Not why did they hurt me, but why did I keep giving them the chance to? It's a brutal shift because it forces you to take ownership of the space you held open for your own undoing. But it's also the most liberating one. When you stop making them the center of the equation, you realize the pattern was never just theirs, it was yours too. Not in the actions, but in the allowance. And here's the truth you couldn't name until now. Their behavior may be predictable, but so was yours. They pulled back. You leaned in, they went silent. You filled the gap. They gave little. You gave more. They needed you. You dropped everything. And every time you played your role, you reinforced theirs. Seeing the pattern isn't enough. You have to break it. And breaking it means disappointing the part of you that still believes the story will end differently if you just keep turning the page. It won't. The ending is already written in the cycle itself. The only plot twist is you. You stop answering right away. You stop explaining every sigh, every boundary, every quiet day. You stop translating your worth into acts of rescue. And slowly, their script stops working. The silences that once made you anxious now become space for your own voice. The crumbs that once kept you following now look pitiful against the feast you can give yourself. The pull they once had fades, not because they've changed, but because you have. And that's when the pattern finally breaks, not when they see what they've done, but when you see what you've allowed. Now we name the pattern. There comes a point where you've named the pattern, traced its edges, seen it for what it is, and you're left standing at a fork in the road. One path is the old one, the well-worn trail where you keep reacting to their every move, where your peace rises and falls like a tide dictated by their moods. The other path is quieter, less obvious, and much harder to take. It's the path where you stop trying to control them and start mastering yourself. The Stoics called it the inner citadel, the fortress of the mind that no outside force can breach unless you open the gates. It's not built overnight. You lay each brick in moments of discipline, moments where you could explode but choose to stay still, moments where you could defend yourself but choose to let your dignity speak instead. At first, it feels unnatural. You're used to measuring progress by their responses, if they finally understand you, if they change, if they treat you differently. Now, you measure progress by something they may never even notice. How steady you remain when they try the same old games. They send a sharp comment designed to hook you. You breathe, slow and deliberate. In for a count of 4. Hold for a count of 4. Out for a count of 6. The old you would have fired back instantly, flooding the moment with words. The new you lets the wave pass without drowning in it. They go silent to provoke your anxiety. You reframe it. Instead of thinking, "What did I do wrong?" you think, "What does this reveal about them?" You start collecting data, not insults. You see their actions as a reflection of their discipline, not your worth. They rewrite the past to paint themselves as the victim. You write something too, a truth note. Just a few lines, kept private, reminding you of what actually happened. It's not for them. It's not for anyone else. It's for you, so that when doubt tries to creep back in, you have your own words waiting to defend you. These are small acts. They won't get applause. They won't be posted for likes. But each one is another stone in the wall of your inner citadel. Another layer of defense against the chaos you once mistook for connection. The pivot isn't about becoming emotionless. The Stoics never preached that. It's about choosing where your emotions go. It's about deciding, moment by moment, that your energy is too precious to be spent on proving points to people who've already decided not to hear you. And here's the truth, they will notice. They won't say it, but they will. They'll feel the change in the way their usual tactics stop working. The silence they used to weaponize now only echoes back at them. The triggers they once pressed now lead to nothing but a calm gaze. And that unnerves them, because your restraint forces them to face themselves. You realize now that self-control isn't passive. It's not about suppressing your feelings until they disappear. It's about channeling them into something that actually builds you. The irritation becomes fuel for your discipline. The sadness becomes a reminder of your capacity to care, and your right to choose who receives that care. The anger becomes a signal that a boundary has been crossed, and a chance to reinforce it without burning down the entire bridge. It's tempting to think this pivot will be a one-time choice, a single moment of clarity after which you never look back. It won't be. It will be a practice, daily and deliberate, especially in the beginning. There will be days when you slip, when their words hook you, when you hear yourself explaining again, defending again, trying again. Those aren't failures. They're part of the training. Every return to discipline is a victory. And slowly, you begin to see what the Stoics meant when they said that freedom isn't the absence of constraints, but the mastery of self. You stop being a character in their script and start being the author of your own. You stop waiting for them to act differently and start acting in alignment with who you want to be. No matter what they do. One day, you'll look back at the moments that used to undo you, the ones that sent you spiraling into self-doubt, and realize they barely stir you now. Not because you don't care about anything, but because you've learned to care for yourself first. That's the pivot. That's the turn that changes everything. This is the pivot. If you're building that inner citadel, subscribe to True Stoic Way. We train it here, day after day. There is a moment, often invisible to everyone else, when you decide. It doesn't arrive with fanfare. It doesn't come wrapped in anger or announced with some dramatic farewell. It happens quietly, almost politely, like a door closing in a draft. You simply choose, without needing to declare it to anyone, that the cycle is over. This is not the silence of manipulation, not the calculated withholding of affection to punish or provoke. It is the silence of self-respect, the invisible line you draw when you finally understand that access to you is a privilege, not a guarantee. You are not playing hard to get. You are protecting what should never have been so easy to take. Decision forms in small, almost imperceptible moments. It begins in your mind, then in your body. You notice the tension leaving your shoulders when you stop waiting for the notification to light up your phone. You notice how your breath feels deeper when you stop rehearsing explanations you will never send. And most of all, You notice how much space you reclaim when you stop giving them so much room in your head. The first morning you don't check your phone before your feet touch the floor feels almost strange. You wake to sunlight spilling through the curtains, to the slow hum of the world waking up, and you realize, without bitterness, without longing, that you are no longer listening for them. The quiet isn't heavy anymore. It's wide. It's clean. You make coffee, and the mug feels warm in your hands in a way it hasn't for months. You sip slowly, not because you are trying to savor the moment, but because savoring has become natural again. It's in the way you notice the faint sound of birds outside, the creak of the floor under your feet, the smell of the day's first heat lifting off the walls. All these small details you missed while your mind was looping on what they might say, when they might appear, if they might change. The truth is, they haven't changed. You have, and that is the quiet decision to let their sameness no longer dictate your life. You no longer answer out of habit. You no longer chase out of fear. You no longer bend to keep the connection alive. You don't need to slam the door. You simply stop holding it open. People mistake this for coldness. They think that if you're not explaining, if you're not fighting to be understood, then you must not care. But care is not measured in how much you're willing to lose yourself for someone else. Real care begins with how you treat yourself when no one else is watching. The Stoics knew this. They taught that self-command is the truest form of power, and that dignity doesn't need to raise its voice. Saying no without ever speaking the word is one of the purest expressions of that power. It's not about winning or losing. It's about preserving. This decision does not make you immune to the ache. You will still feel it, the echoes of old conversations, the muscle memory of checking in, the reflex to explain yourself. But now you meet those moments differently. Instead of rushing to bridge the gap, you stand still and let it remain a gap. You understand that not every distance needs to be closed. It's not a performance. There's no scoreboard. No one else needs to know this is yours entirely. The quiet decision lives between you and the part of you that finally stopped begging for peace from someone who only knew how to disrupt it. And here's the most unexpected part. In making this choice, you don't just take something away from them. You give something back to yourself. You give yourself mornings that begin without dread, days that don't revolve around someone else's availability, nights where the only weight in your bed is your own breathing. You give yourself the freedom to let the silence be just silence. Not a trap, not a punishment, not a test. The first time you see their name flash on your screen after this decision, you will feel the pull. Old habits die loudly, but you'll also feel the steadiness that has taken root since you stopped feeding the cycle. You'll feel the difference between a reflex and a choice, and you'll know, without needing to tell anyone, that you've already chosen. This is the quiet decision. Absence is not nothing. It is not a blank space. Not an empty room. Absence is presence inverted. A presence they can no longer touch, no longer predict, no longer control. For someone who once built their confidence on your reaction, the quiet you've left behind is louder than any confrontation could ever be. They were ready for drama. They rehearsed for it. In their mind, you'd come back with accusations, with tears, with a need to prove your point. They expected long messages. They could dissect, words they could twist, a fire they could pretend to put out while stoking it in secret. But when the expected storm never arrived, when their bait fell into still water without a ripple, the script they depended on began to crumble. This is the first shockwave, the realization that your energy is no longer theirs to provoke. They test the silence, maybe with a casual text, maybe with a just checking in, maybe by posting something designed to get under your skin. And yet, your absence remains steady, unshaken. No retaliation, no cryptic messages, no coded responses for them to decode. Just a gap they can't close without meeting you where you are. And they can't, because where you are now is outside the reach of their old patterns. The second shockwave comes later, in the small hours of their own solitude. They begin to notice that the satisfaction they used to get from pulling your strings no longer arrives. That rush of control is gone, replaced by something they can't name but feel in their bones, a kind of emptiness that no distraction seems to fill. Because the truth is, you weren't just a presence in their life, you were an anchor. And anchors are only missed when the drift begins. This is why absence is greater than attack. An attack can be defended against. It can be spun, minimized, redirected. Absence, on the other hand, offers nothing to resist. It leaves them with only themselves, their choices, and the mirror they've been avoiding. Your absence becomes the echo of every moment they ignored you, every kindness they exploited, every boundary they crossed. They don't hear your voice anymore, but they feel the shape of the space where it used to be. And that's the part that lingers. Meanwhile, your life doesn't pause to accommodate their reckoning. You begin to see what joy as justice really means. You don't need to prove they lost something valuable. Your happiness proves it without a word. You don't need to announce that you've moved on. Your growth makes it obvious. Every step you take toward your own fulfillment is an answer they can't argue with. They will watch in whatever way they can, quietly checking, silently scrolling, trying to piece together whether your calm is real. And they will discover, to their discomfort, that it is. That the light in your face is not performative. That the laughter they hear is not a cover. That the peace you radiate is not fragile, not waiting to be shattered by their return. This is the third shockwave, understanding that you are not pretending. The absence is not a tactic. It is a state of being. And that makes it permanent in a way they cannot influence. The Stoics knew that the most unshakable defense is to live in such alignment with your own values that no insult, no betrayal, no loss can pull you out of yourself. You've learned that now. You've stopped offering them the raw material they once used to dismantle you. You've stopped being available for the games they play to avoid themselves. And here's the quiet victory. You don't need them to understand any of this. You don't need their acknowledgement, their regret, or even their awareness. The point was never to make them see. The point was to reclaim what you let slip away, and you have. Every morning you wake without that knot in your stomach. Every decision you make without second-guessing, every moment you feel fully present in your own life. That is the proof. And while they may still search for cracks, still hope for an opening, they will find none. Because the door is closed, not locked in anger, but sealed in clarity. Absence has done what confrontation never could. It has shown them, and more importantly, it has shown you, that you are no longer living in reaction to someone else's chaos. You are living in creation of your own peace. Here comes the echo. If your peace is becoming louder than any argument, subscribe to True Stoic Way and leave "I choose peace" below. Karma doesn't arrive with trumpets. It doesn't storm in wearing the armor of justice, demanding an audience, asking for you to watch. Karma moves in silence, not to hide, but because it doesn't need applause. It works like the tide, shaping the shoreline one wave at a time, until one day the landscape is unrecognizable, and those who once stood so firmly in the shallows find themselves adrift. When you walk away, the part of you that still aches might imagine justice of performance. You might picture the moment they get what's coming, the dramatic collapse of their facade, the perfect line of poetry in the form of consequence. But the truth is less cinematic and more inevitable. Life itself becomes the mirror, and they cannot avoid it forever. Your absence removes the shield they didn't realize you were holding for them, without you there to absorb the fallout of their choices. Those choices land exactly where they should, at their own feet. The late-night restlessness that once sent them to your door now sends them pacing through their own thoughts. The frustration they once dumped into your lap now fills their own rooms. The same games they used to play with you, they try them elsewhere and find they don't land the same way. The Stoics understood karma not as a mystical force, but as the natural balance of cause and effect. Actions have consequences, whether or not you see them. When someone spends their energy taking without giving, tearing down instead of building, avoiding instead of facing, the structure of their life will reflect that in time. The walls will be thin, the foundations will be weak, and when the wind changes, they will feel the draft. Picture this. A man once had someone in his life who listened without judgment, who steadied him when his temper flared, who reminded him of the better parts of himself when he wanted to forget them. He didn't think much of it. He assumed such presence was endless, that she would always be there. When she left, he told himself he didn't need her. He filled the space with new faces, louder conversations, distractions stacked like sandbags against the rising water. Years later, in a dimly lit kitchen, he sits across from someone new. A disagreement starts small but escalates fast. He raises his voice and sees her flinch. Not the woman from before, but someone else entirely. Yet in that instant, something cold slides into his chest. It's the memory of the one who didn't flinch, the one who steadied instead of recoiled, the one he lost. He doesn't say her name. He doesn't admit it to anyone. But in that moment, the mirror returns, and it shows him exactly what he traded away. That's how karma works when you're not looking. It's not always public. It's not designed for your entertainment. Sometimes it's a quiet moment at a stoplight, a familiar song in a grocery store, a scent that unlocks a memory they wish they could forget. Sometimes it's realizing that all the new people in their life see only the surface, and no one sees what you once saw. And you're not there to witness any of it. You're not tracking their steps, scrolling through their life, or waiting for proof. You're too busy building your own. That's the part they never expected, that you would stop attending their story altogether. Because without an audience, the performance loses its purpose. The beauty of karma without theater is that it frees you from the need to play judge and jury. You don't have to orchestrate anything. You don't have to wish for their downfall or check for signs of it. Life will handle the balance, and you are not required to stand in the rain to watch it happen. And here's the deeper truth. Sometimes, karma doesn't look like loss. Sometimes it looks like an unshakable knowing in them, not in you, that they will never again find exactly what they had. They can find company, but not connection. They can find attention, but not presence. They can find affection, but not the kind of quiet safety that only exists when someone truly sees you. That kind of realization doesn't explode. It settles in, heavy and permanent, like the slow closing of a door they thought would always be open. This is not revenge. This is nature. The consequence of action. The mirror of behavior. And while they stand in front of it, you are free to turn toward the life that was waiting for you all along. A life where your energy is invested in what grows, where your boundaries are honored, where your peace is not a reaction, but a foundation. Don't need to see the mirror to know it's there. You just need to keep walking in the opposite direction. This is where the mirror returns. There's a moment after the leaving and the silence and the shockwaves, when you start to notice that the space they once occupied in your mind is no longer just empty, it's available. And what you choose to fill it with will decide the shape of your future. You've spent so long pouring into someone else that your own reserves ran low. But now the flow is returning, and it's time to direct it where it belongs. Reclaiming yourself is not one grand act. It's 1,000 small ones, repeated until they become a rhythm you no longer have to think about. You don't start by leaping into a new life overnight. You start by reclaiming the nights themselves. You let yourself sleep without the tension of waiting for a late reply. You wake without scanning for proof that you still matter to someone who forgot how to show it. Rest stops being an accident and becomes a decision, the first signal to your body that you're back in charge. From there, you turn your attention to the vessel that carries you through this world. You feed it like you respect it. You move it like you value it. You stop using exhaustion as proof of your worth and start using vitality as the measure instead. And as your body responds, your mind follows, because strength in one creates strength in the other. Then comes the work, not the work you did to keep someone else happy, but the work that builds your own foundation. You focus on what you can create, what you can master, what you can sustain. You stop chasing approval in spaces that were never meant to hold you and start building a life that can stand on its own legs. You look at your finances not as a source of stress, but as a form of sovereignty. Every decision you make with clarity, every debt you pay, every dollar you save, every choice you make to live within your means becomes a brick in the wall of your independence. You stop seeing money only in terms of what it can buy, and start seeing it as a way to ensure you are never trapped in a place that harms you simply because you can't afford to leave. And you invest in your skills, not for them, not to impress anyone, but for you. You learn something new, even if it's small, because knowledge is a form of armor no one can strip from you. You sharpen the tools you already have, because mastery builds confidence, and confidence changes the way you move in every room. As you do these things, the little wins start to stack. You notice the difference between the person who wakes up with dread and the one who wakes up with a plan. You catch yourself smiling at a thought that has nothing to do with the past. You realize your worth isn't tied to how well you hold someone else together, but to how well you hold yourself. And while it's tempting to see these as separate victories, they're really one movement, the steady rebuilding of the inner reputation you hold with yourself. Because at the end of the day, the only approval that truly changes you is your own dot to make it tangible. You can run through a mental checklist, not in the form of rules, but as a quiet conversation with yourself. Did I rest fully last night? Did I feed and move my body with care? Did I take one step toward my own work, my own stability, my own craft? Did I make a decision today that strengthens my independence? Did I challenge my mind to grow? When you can answer yes to even a few of these, you're not just moving forward, you're reclaiming territory that was always yours. And here's the beauty. This isn't about perfection. You will have days when you falter, when old habits knock on the door, when progress feels slow. But now you know that one quiet, intentional act can turn the tide. And that's all you need. The decision, repeated often enough, to keep choosing yourself in ways big and small. What you're building now is more than a routine. It's a fortress, not made of walls to keep people out, but of standards that ensure anyone who enters comes with respect. You're building a life you can trust, because you've proven to yourself, day after day, that you'll protect it. Now you rebuild. Build with us. Subscribe to True Stoic Way and make this your daily practice. There's a point in your healing when the air changes. It's not because you've left everything behind in some dramatic escape, but because you've climbed high enough that the old atmosphere can't reach you anymore. The altitude is different. Here, the air is thinner, cleaner. The games they used to play can't survive in it, not because they've stopped trying, but because their methods were built for lower ground. At this height, you start to notice how quiet it is. Not the tense silence of waiting for the next move, but the expansive silence of being out of range. Messages don't sting the same way. Glances don't carry the same weight. And the bait they once dangled so confidently now just drifts past without catching on anything inside you. This isn't avoidance. You're not hiding on some mountaintop, hoping the world forgets about you. You're breathing in a space where their chaos simply can't get enough oxygen to burn. The very altitude of your growth is what keeps you safe, because the version of you that once lived in their world has been replaced by someone who doesn't need to be there at all. People often confuse this with apathy, as if not reacting means you've stopped caring about life altogether. But detachment is not apathy. It's precision. It's knowing exactly what deserves your energy and what doesn't. Apathy is when nothing moves you. Detachment is when only the right things do. You still feel deeply, maybe even more than before, but now you direct that feeling with intention. You care about what you can build, about who you allow close, about the spaces that honor you. You can look at the old patterns without being pulled back into them. You can acknowledge the hurt without reopening the wound. It's like learning to breathe at higher altitudes. At first, it's uncomfortable. Your body craves the density of the old air, the familiarity of those cycles, even when you know they were slowly suffocating you. But the longer you stay up here, the more your lungs adapt. What once felt thin now feels pure, and you begin to wonder how you ever tolerated breathing down there for so long. The Stoics would call this living according to nature, and part of nature is outgrowing environments that no longer sustain you. Just as a plant will turn toward the light, you've turned toward what nourishes you. And like any living thing, you can't thrive where the soil is poisoned. No matter how much you once loved the view, you might still see them from time to time, calling up from below, trying to draw you back down into familiar terrain. They may try the same provocations, the same hooks, even the same sweetened promises that used to work. But from this altitude, you can see the whole landscape. You know exactly where those roads lead, and you have no desire to descend. The power of this height isn't just in the distance you've created. It's in the perspective it gives you. You can see patterns clearly now, not just theirs but your own. You can recognize when someone's behavior is a reflection of their own battles rather than a measure of your worth. And with that clarity, you can decide calmly, decisively, where to step next. It's not about being untouchable in the sense that nothing can ever affect you. It's about being untouchable in the sense that the wrong things no longer have the power to derail you. That is the true altitude of healing, not that you feel nothing, but that you feel everything you need to, and nothing you don't. And here's the part that might surprise you. This altitude is not lonely. At first, it might seem that way, because fewer people can meet you here, but those who can, they bring their own clarity, their own oxygen, their own steadiness. Conversations feel lighter, trust feels easier, connection feels natural instead of negotiated. You realize that healing didn't just remove you from what harmed you, it aligned you with what's meant for you. And when you look back at the climb, every hard step, every breathless moment, every choice to keep going makes sense. You weren't escaping. You were ascending. This is the climb. Healing changes your altitude, but altitude doesn't mean the world stops sending weather your way. Eventually, they will circle back. Sometimes it's months later, sometimes years, sometimes just when you've settled into the rhythm of your new life. They arrive not as strangers, but as echoes, carrying the same tactics wrapped in slightly new packaging. The first form is the apology script. You'll hear lines that sound like remorse, but feel rehearsed. I've been doing a lot of thinking lately. Or, I realize now what I lost. The old you might have rushed to fill the silence, to reassure them, to let them back in on the promise that this time will be different. But you've learned that an apology is only as meaningful as the behavior that follows, and scripted regret without sustained change is just another performance. Then comes the future faking. Brand visions of what could be if you'd only give them one more chance. We could start fresh. I've been planning a trip for us. I can see us building a life together. These aren't real plans. They're bait designed to bypass your memory of the past and fast forward you into an imagined future where the patterns no longer apply. But you know better now. Promises are easy to make when they cost nothing in the present. And finally, the jealousy triggers. Subtle or overt, they'll dangle someone new in front of you, hoping you'll break the silence to reclaim what was never in danger of being taken, your own worth. This is not about love. It's about leverage. They want proof they still have access to your emotions, even if it's through anger or envy. These are the tests. The key is not to meet them with hostility, but with precision. You don't need to be cruel. You don't need to be verbose. You only need to protect your gate. Think of it as a 3-step response. Acknowledge, boundary, exit. Step 1. Acknowledge. You recognize what they've said without validating it. Short, neutral sentences like, "I hear what you're saying. I understand that's how you feel. I appreciate you sharing that." Step 2. Boundary. You make your position clear, calmly, and directly, without over-explaining. "That's not something I'm willing to revisit. I'm not in a place where I want to re-engage. I'm focusing my energy elsewhere." Step 3. Exit. You close the interaction without leaving room for negotiation. Take care of yourself. I wish you the best moving forward. There's nothing more for us to discuss. When spoken with calm certainty, these lines don't invite debate. They don't feed the dynamic they're trying to revive. They simply reinforce that your peace is not a bargaining chip. The Stoics would call this equanimity, the evenness of mind that neither inflates with praise nor collapses under provocation. By keeping your responses concise and consistent, you deny them the foothold they need to climb back into your life. You also spare yourself the emotional labor of trying to convince someone who has already shown you who they are. These trials are not about them at all. They're about you proving to yourself that the walls you've built around your peace are not decorative, they are functional. Every time you apply the 3 steps, you strengthen those walls, not as barriers to connection, but as filters that ensure only what nourishes you gets through. And here's the quiet truth. Passing these tests doesn't just keep them out. It keeps you in your values, in your clarity, in the life you've been building without their chaos. You stop fearing their return because you know the gates will hold. And in that certainty, you find the freedom to live without looking over your shoulder. These are the tests. If you want calm, word-for-word responses for messy moments, subscribe to True Stoic Way. Healing changes the way you love, not because you've shut the world out, but because you've finally learned what it means to let the right people in. The boundaries you carry now are not barricades, they are invitations to respect. They don't say stay away. They say come closer, but only if you can honor this space. You no longer mistake constant access for connection. You no longer hand out the deepest parts of yourself to anyone who shows interest. You understand that love, without clarity, is just hope wearing a blindfold. And you have taken the blindfold off. When you meet someone new, you don't rush to fill the silence with your whole life story. You watch. You listen. You pay attention to how they treat the smallest moments, the ones that don't carry the weight of performance. You notice if they say thank you without prompting, if they ask about your day without making it a setup to talk about theirs, if they listen without scrolling through their phone. These are not small things. They are the blueprint for how they will treat you when the shine wears off. And when something doesn't feel right, you speak it, calmly, directly, without apology. Not as an ultimatum, but as a declaration of your values. I don't accept being spoken to that way. I need honesty in this space. I'm not interested in building something on half-truths. You say these things not to control, but to make sure that what you're building is worth standing in. The difference now is that you don't bend your standards to keep someone. You let your standards do the keeping for you. Picture this. You're sitting across from someone at a small cafe. The air smells of fresh coffee. There's a soft hum of conversation around you. And for once, you're not scanning the moment for red flags. You're letting it be what it is. The conversation flows, not in bursts of charm or rehearsed anecdotes, but in the kind of ease that makes you forget time. They ask questions and listen to the answers. You laugh without wondering if it's too much. You share without feeling the urge to edit yourself for safety. There's no subtle competition for who holds more power in the exchange. There's no undercurrent of waiting for them to vanish after they get what they came for. It feels mutual. And mutuality, after what you've lived through, is its own kind of miracle. This doesn't mean you believe every new person is flawless. It means you trust yourself enough to walk away when you see that they aren't right for you. You know now that leaving at the first sign of consistent disrespect isn't cruelty. It's self-respect. You understand that boundaries don't just protect you from others. They protect the other person from being in a relationship where they can't meet your needs. And here's the part that makes this love different. You're not guarding yourself out of fear. You're guiding yourself out of wisdom. You've seen what happens when you give away your time, your body, your mind to people who aren't ready for them. You've seen what it costs to ignore the truth because you're invested in the potential. And you've chosen, deliberately, to love in a way that honors what you've built in your absence. The Stoics believed that love should be guided by virtue, not in a cold, mechanical sense, but in the belief that love without virtue collapses under its own weight. You've adopted that belief now. You measure not just how someone makes you feel, but how they treat you when the feeling fades. And because of that, the people who can't breathe at this altitude will drift away quickly. Let them. Your standards are not meant to make everyone stay. They are meant to ensure that those who do stay are capable of building something real with you. You know now that love is not a sacrifice of self. It's an exchange between two people who each protect their own peace while contributing to each other's. And that is why what you have now is not a wall. It's a gate, open only to those who know how to knock. This is how you love now. I don't know if I'd call this a letter, because I'm not writing it for you to read. I'm writing it for the version of me who stayed long after the welcome had worn off. The one who thought that love was measured by how much pain you could carry without putting it down. The one who believed that holding on was the same as being strong. I remember you, sitting in quiet rooms, pretending not to notice how heavy the silence felt, telling yourself that it was just a bad day, that people go through phases, that if you were patient enough, kind enough, forgiving enough, something would shift. You took their absence as a challenge and their coldness as a wound you were meant to heal. And when it didn't get better, you blamed yourself for not being enough. If I could sit beside you now, I wouldn't tell you to leave. Not yet. I know you wouldn't listen anyway. I would just tell you to pay attention to the way your own voice is getting quieter, the way your laughter doesn't come as easily, the way you go to bed tired in ways that have nothing to do with sleep. I would tell you that these are not signs of love. They are signs of erosion. You didn't know it then, but you were giving away pieces of yourself in small, unmeasured handfuls, thinking you could always make more. You didn't see that there's a limit to how much you can pour into someone who has no intention of filling you back. And when you finally reached that limit, it wasn't because you stopped caring. It was because you finally started caring about yourself. I want to thank you for surviving the parts I don't like to remember, for carrying me through days when the weight felt unmovable, for finding small ways to keep going, even when you didn't know what you were going toward. You made choices that hurt, but you made them because you were trying to love in the only way you knew how. And for that, I can't be angry with you. but I can let you go. I can release the version of me that thought my worth was negotiable. I can let her rest from the constant work of proving, explaining, and defending. I can put down the belief that if I just stayed long enough, I could turn someone into what I needed them to be. You taught me something in your persistence, even if you didn't know it. You taught me that love without reciprocity is not noble, it's depleting. You taught me that silence can mean peace or punishment, and the difference is in who controls it. You taught me that walking away is not the same as giving up. Sometimes it's the only way to stop losing. So I'm not sending this to them. They don't need to read it. This is between you and me. Between the self who stayed and the self who finally left. Between the one who loved without boundaries and the one who learned to love with them. I'm telling you goodbye, not as a rejection, but as an act of gratitude. You got me this far. You gave me the raw material I needed to build the person I am now, and the person I am now owes you freedom. Freedom from the constant bargaining. Freedom from the measuring and the waiting. Freedom from the version of love that made you smaller. A quiet farewell. If this closure spoke for you, subscribe to True Stoic Way and write 3 words. I choose peace. Unbothered is often mistaken for a performance, the practiced indifference, the carefully curated appearance of not caring, the social pose of someone who wants to be seen as untouchable. But the life you're building now has nothing to do with pretending. It isn't about denying your feelings. It's about arranging your inner world so that the outer one can't throw it into chaos. You wake up not with the thought of who might disrupt your day, but with the intention of what you will create in it. Your work no longer feels like a desperate sprint for approval. It feels like an extension of your values. You choose projects that align with who you are becoming, not just what will earn you applause. You no longer burn yourself out trying to meet every demand, because you've learned that saying yes to everything is just another way of saying no to yourself. Your body, once neglected under the weight of constant emotional labor, is no longer an afterthought. You feed it without punishing it. You move it without resenting it. You treat it as the home you live in, not the burden you carry. There's a steadiness in your breathing now, a pace that feels like it belongs to you instead of to someone else's expectations. Friendships have shifted too. You're not collecting people like trophies anymore. You're tending to the ones who bring warmth without demand, presence without performance. The conversations you choose to have now don't leave you feeling smaller or unseen. They leave you feeling fuller, not because the other person fills you up, but because the exchange is balanced. And somewhere in this new rhythm, you've found your mission. It's not always grand or glamorous, but it's yours. Maybe it's the work you do in the world. Maybe it's the way you show up for your community. Maybe it's simply living each day in a way that your younger self would be proud of. Whatever it is, it holds your attention so fully that the noise from the outside world no longer pulls you off course. You've become like a harbor that has upgraded its lighthouse. The light is brighter now, clearer. It shines not to lure every ship, but to guide only those that navigate with care. The waves will still come, and ships will still approach, but the dangerous ones, the ones that once crashed into your shore with no regard for the damage they left behind, can't get close anymore. Not because you've built impenetrable walls, but because your signals are clear, your boundaries marked, Your water's no longer open to those who bring storms instead of cargo. The harbor is still a place of welcome, but welcome for the right vessels. And that is the essence of the unbothered life. It's not about pretending nothing touches you. It's about knowing exactly what is allowed to dock in your world and having the discipline to send the rest back out to sea. It's about choosing your battles so carefully that most days you don't have any. The Stoics knew this as ataraxia, a state of serene calm, not because life stops challenging you, but because your responses are no longer dictated by every shift in the wind. You've learned that most of what used to disturb you was not the event itself, but the story you told yourself about it. Change the story, and you change the impact. Now, when something stirs the water, you don't rush to fix it. You observe. You assess, you decide. And often, you let it pass without action, because not every ripple deserves your attention. Living unbothered doesn't mean you've stopped feeling. It means you've stopped giving your feelings away to those who haven't earned them. It means your days are spent in alignment with what matters, rather than in reaction to what doesn't. It means you can sit in the quiet of your own company without craving a distraction to make it bearable. It's a life built not on armor, but on order. And order is a kind of freedom, not the freedom from challenge, but the freedom to meet challenge without losing yourself in it. This is your new rhythm. There is a moment when you realize you've been waiting for something that will never come, and you stop waiting. Not because you've given up, but because you finally understood that the ending you deserve is not theirs to give. It was never theirs. You are the closure. It's in the way you wake up without reaching for your phone. It's in the way you make plans without scanning for someone else's availability. It's in the way you laugh now, fully, without the shadow of wondering if they'd approve. Closure is not the words they never said or the apology they never offered. Closure is the life you've built in the space where they used to stand. The old you would have thought the story wasn't finished until they acknowledged the damage. The new you knows the story was finished the moment you decided to stop living. In its pages, you are not a character in their plot anymore. You are the author of your own. They may still be out there, telling their version, shaping the narrative to protect their ego, painting you in shades that don't match the truth. But that's their work, not yours. You don't need to correct them. You don't need to defend yourself to people who weren't there to witness the quiet battles you fought. Your life, steady, full, unshaken, is the only rebuttal you'll ever need. The Stoics taught that the best answer to injury is to live unlike the one who caused it. You've taken that teaching and made it your own. Your days are no longer defined by what happened to you, but by what you are creating from here. Every step forward is a line in the new chapter. Every choice to stay in alignment with your values is a sentence of freedom. You've learned that the most powerful revenge is not revenge at all. It's joy, it's peace. It's walking through the world so rooted in who you are that no storm can shake you. And that is what makes this the final turn. Not the absence of pain, but the presence of purpose. Because now you see that nothing they could say or do would carry the weight you once gave it. They could come back with perfect words, and it would change nothing. They could admit every wrong, and you would still be here, living in the truth you've already chosen. You don't need them to free you. You freed yourself. This is the last turn, not because the road ends, but because the road is now yours alone. You are the closure. You are the proof. You are the answer to every question that once kept you up at night. And the only thing left to do now is live so well that the past has no choice but to fade into the background of your story. If you found yourself somewhere in these words, don't let this be the last time we meet. Subscribe to True Stoic Way now. Leave I choose peace, so the next time pain knocks, discipline answers the door.